Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am H.A. Executive Director of Racial Justice Now, celebrating the Dignity in Schools campaign, 9th annual week of action. We're here in Chicago for the national event of the offices of our comrades, our allies, Kofi, and we are doing great work as we express to the world we believe in counselors, not cops. I'm here today with Mark Warren, Professor Mark Warren from the University of Massachusetts in Boston, as well as the beautiful Zakiya Sankara-Jabar, co-founder of Racial Justice Now, currently the national field organizer of the Dignity in Schools campaign. Mark has a new book out, Lift Us Up, Don't Push Us Out, building on the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that has been circulated around the education justice movement. Mark, please share with us, how did you come to write this book?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Hashim, for inviting me here for this discussion and the Dignity in Schools campaign. I'm happy to be here supporting the Week of Action for this coalition that's doing really incredibly important work to combat the school-to-prison pipeline. That work actually is documented in various ways in the book, Lift Us Up, Don't Push Us Out. But so how did I come to do the book? So I am a professor, and I've been studying and working with community organizing groups, parent organizing groups, youth organizing groups for 25 years now, working around education equity, racial equity, and educational justice issues. And for a long time, I found that those groups were working pretty much on their own in local communities. But maybe 6-7 years ago, things started to change. You started to see local groups coming together in things like the Dignity in Schools campaign, the Alliance for Educational Justice, the Journey for Justice, fighting privatization of education, the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools. Something different is happening in the world of educational justice movement. Of course, we've always had folks organizing, particularly in low-income communities of color. Parents and young people have always been organizing for educational justice, but for the most part doing it on their own in their local areas. 10 years ago, there was no Dignity in Schools campaign. There was no Alliance for Educational Justice, and now there is. And so I thought it was time, since I write books, to write a book to really publicize this phenomena, to let people know that there is a renewed education justice in this movement. And not only that, it is really making important victories in our communities, in our schools, at the local, state, and national level. And I wanted to work with people like Zakiya, who has been organizing parents of color in Dayton and now nationally, and help them write their own stories and lift up their own analysis about how they've been fighting systemic racism in our schools, not just fighting it, but actually achieving real change in our schools and community. And that's what we tried to do in this book, bring together people across the country in all kinds of different places, parents, young people, teachers who are organizing other teachers to transform education, and their allies to bring those stories together.
Thank you, Mark. Zakiya Sankara-Jabar, co-founder of Racial Justice Now, based in Dayton, Ohio. You brought Mark out to Dayton on a number of occasions for this book. The organization that you started with your co-founder, Dr. Vanelia Randall, it's going to be your organization that you co-founded be about 7 years old coming up. Can you tell us why is it important to have your essay in this book?
Thank you, Hashim, for the question and for doing this interview. I thought it was critically important for us to have a story in the book to lift up the voices of grassroots leadership, sort of organic leadership, and the fact that people who are most directly impacted by these issues having their own analyses and their own ideas and actual answers to how we combat and change or plug that school-to-prison pipeline. And so that's exactly, what we did in Dayton and around the state of Ohio, was organize regular, everyday parents who were experiencing this issue. And is really a remarkable story when I think about politically, the environment in Dayton, of course, but also around the entire state. I feel like an organization of our size and also being Black-led, but not only that, being Black-led by poor and working class families. I think that's a very important distinction. in an organization, and being able to finally get some support for our work, to implement our ideas and to get our ideas out there to a larger audience. So for me, that's why it was really important to have our story in this book, about a little small Midwest town, in Ohio. Like, to me, I feel like it exemplifies the fact that there are folks, whether we know it or not, or whether we hear about them, in mainstream media, there are regular, everyday people, Black folks, poor folks, who are pushing back on a lot of these harmful and systemic policies that harm our families.
Thank you. Mark, I have a two-part question. How does a national movement help strengthen organizing to change policy at the local level? But for those of us that are not politicized or politically savvy, what exactly is policy? So again, how does a national movement help strengthen organizing to change policy at the local level? But again, how would you define policy?
Sure. So by policy, I mean the rules and regulations adopted by whether that's school districts or state legislatures, or could even be the federal Congress. So for example, school discipline policy is a policy that a school district at a local level would have, that would say you can suspend students from school, you can suspend them out of school for certain kinds of violations, and it would list those violations. And one kind of violation might be something called willful defiance. And that is a very subjective behavior judged by the teacher. It could be a student standing up and criticizing the curriculum, for example, or acting out in some even minor way could be considered willful defiance. And the policy would allow a teacher, and in some cases even require a teacher, to to suspend that student. And so the movement has been trying to change policy, because by changing policy, then that can lead to the protection of our students and keeping them in school. So if you ban, for example, suspensions for willful defiance, then students can no longer be pushed out of school for that. And you may know that we have a very widespread problem in this country with what we call zero tolerance school discipline policies. So many students, particularly Black and brown students, particularly boys or those with special needs, are often suspended for minor infractions and then on the road to what we call the school to prison pipeline. So students are pushed out of school and suspended. They might be out on the street, where they're then subject to discriminatory police behavior or even police abuse that might end them into the juvenile or criminal justice system. So we want to keep kids in school and learning, and for that we need to create changes in policy so that these policies don't call for or even allow suspensions in these kinds of cases. Now, these policies are mainly set at the local level. They can also be set at the state level, but our education system in this country is primarily decentralized. The core place where policy is set is at the local level. So local organizing groups like those, like Zakiya's organization that she co-founded in Dayton, Ohio, are organizing to try to change policies in Dayton, Ohio, or what could be in Boston, Massachusetts, where I am. But you have to build the power to change policy at those levels. And that means organizing parents, organizing young people, but oftentimes that's not enough. And for you may know that grassroots organizing groups often don't get very much funds. They can't afford to hire much staff. They're working with folks who have maybe challenges of having to work a lot of jobs to make a living. And so we need to find ways to strengthen and build up local organizing. And that's what I think is so important with what's going on with our national movements today. They're not mainly about changing things in Washington, although that could be part of it, but that's not primarily. So something like the Dignity in Schools campaign has federal policy that it cares about, but a lot of what it's doing is trying to connect and strengthen local organizing, developing new policies, like a model, what they call the Model Code of Conduct. It's a new school discipline policy that local groups they don't have to start from scratch, right? You want to change your district's policy, here's a model code that you can start with, right? Or here we can have an organizer come or a national field director come and help you cultivate parent leadership, give them some of the political education that they might need, or training in organizing to help them organize in a stronger way. So I think there's a lot of things that the national movement is doing to strengthen local organizations, and in places where people are up against pretty well organized opponents. That could be conservatives, that could be maybe well organized and well resourced teachers unions that might at least initially oppose what's being demanded. Local groups really need a national movement, and the national movement is really about creating a rolling series of victories that spread across the country, and each one building upon the last one and going further.
That's a powerful answer there, Mark. Thank you for that. Zakiya, we know that Racial Justice Now is former co-chairs of the Dignity in Schools campaign, and that you met Mark through the Dignity in Schools campaign. So tell us, how did Racial Justice Now benefit from being part of the Dignity in Schools campaign?
Yeah, I think Racial Justice Now has benefited tremendously from being members of Dignity in Schools and Journey for Justice Alliance as well. I think that it's really critically important for grassroots organizations to have support from a national organization that has resources, that also has a network that local organizations, when coming together, DSC holds membership meetings. Those were life-changing for a lot of our members who attended. For me, when I attended Days at the Capitol, was another campaign that DSC does, the Model Code on School Discipline. All of those things were extremely helpful, like having access to those resources, to those documents. DSC actually released its statement on charter schools in Dayton. That was a very powerful, meeting to have, because charter schools are an issue in Dayton, and how they suck the resources from public schools. And so that was very, very impactful. We had a role in helping to develop that around the language and stuff that we used in that. So, and now I'm the national field organizer with DSC. So, there's just a number of ways, that I can think about how Racial Justice Now has benefited. Not just Racial Justice Now. I can think of other organizations within the Dignity in Schools campaign, grassroots organizations that have little to no resources, like Racial Justice Now, at the time, who benefit. Youth members, like I can think of DWH Inspires, well, I know Daquan has benefited tremendously from the networking opportunities that DSC has provided him. Going to the UN was an amazing experience, according to him. DSC provided that opportunity to attend the youth assembly. DSC is amazing, and I think that we do a good job of trying to live up to our ideals and what we were founded on, and that was basically providing capacity building and support to local folks on the ground who are really doing the work. And I think that organizations, again, like Racial Justice Now, DWH Inspires, Citizens for a Better Greenville, Mama Joyce's organization, have benefited tremendously from being a part of such a loving network of other parent organizers, youth organizers, policy and advocacy organizations. Just amazing. And then, of course, the support funds go a long way for groups who don't have access to big foundations, who would never get support from a big foundation. DSC re-grants or supports financially through what's called member support funds, where we basically re-grant or support about 30 to 40% of our own budget back to the ground. And that was a part of the leadership who founded Dignity in Schools, like folks like Maisie, folks like Maisie Chen, who's also in the book, from Cadre in South Los Angeles, who's one of the founders, Moani Malik, who was also one of the founders of DSC from Drum in New York, and of course Mama Joyce, I affectionately call her Mama Joyce Parker from Citizens for a Better Greenville in Greenville, Mississippi. And so the framework and the tenets and how DSC does its work was set by those three women of color.
Thank you. Racial Justice Now and the West Dayton Youth Task Force, which is its youth division, has had a campaign to promote culturally relevant curriculum and culturally responsive schools for the last 3 years.
Yep. That's right here.
And so please share with us, why is it important for Black and brown children to receive a culturally relevant curriculum or culturally relevant education?
Oh man, that's extremely important. I think, there are, educator activists, folks like Dr. Asa Hilliard, Joanne Zakiya, who I talk about in this book, folks who, are both academics, but I would also say, activists who had done research and found out that academically, children of color benefit from seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum. Like, to me, it seems like you shouldn't have to do a study to know that, but I mean, it's been done. Like, there's work that has been done. Joyce King, who is also in this book, has written extensively about how important culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy is for students of color. Black students, there's work that shows that Black students benefit from having African-centered curriculum or Afrocentric curriculum. And other communities have been fighting and successfully winning ethnic studies, programs in their schools. There were youth activists out in Arizona who had to go to court because the districts fought back against them on ethnic studies. So I think that the level of fight that we see, right, from the establishment, from the people who control school districts, from the people who control departments of education in states, the reluctance to culturally relevant curriculum and ethnic studies programs, I think to me says a lot, because it means that you're not socializing people to be against themselves, right? You're not socializing them into a Eurocentric curriculum, which basically keeps the status quo. I think if you're socializing people in their own culture, in their own, motifs and modalities, or whatever that is, culturally for that particular group of people, it gives them power. Over their own language, culture, socially. All of those different things are very critically important. And so I think Racial Justice Now, West State Youth Task Force is one of the first local organizations to do a really big campaign around this. But I know that there's other groups in New York, like AQE, I believe, have won some successful in New York City dollars to actually be implemented into providing culturally relevant curriculum and pedagogy for students in New York City, which is majority students of color. I mean, it seems like that shouldn't have to be a fight. It just should make sense that that's what you should do when the majority of your students are students of color.
Thank you. Mark, how do campaigns for culturally relevant curriculum strengthen the education movement?
Yes. Well, I think that there's a few ways to look at that. I think that the work that folks are doing in Dayton and within the Dignity in Schools campaign, and beyond that, I think a lot of people are working on culturally relevant education is very important, because as an educational justice movement, we're not just against things. We are against things. We're against the school-to-prison pipeline. We're against massive school closings in Black and brown communities that take schools out of communities.
Right.
We're against zero tolerance discipline. But the movement is also for creating a transformative education that can really empower our young people. And what do we need for that, right? So we need things like sustainable community schools that are really rooted in communities that, the Journey for Justice talks about, G2 Brown talks about in here. We need restorative school cultures built based on respect and strong relationships with parents and young people. But we also need a culturally relevant education for our children to grow, to understand their own history and their own culture, and to grow and develop and build power through that process. I think no people can build power or come to their own selves if they are alienated from their own culture. And obviously, young African American and Latino folks are learning about their culture in their communities, but then they're going into schools. And oftentimes those schools are failing them because they're completely disconnected and those cultures aren't seen as very important and they're disrespected. And so we need to create an essential part of creating a movement and an educational system that really not just meets people's needs or where children can do a little bit better on a test score, but really become their whole authentic selves as change agents in their lives and in their communities requires a deep understanding of people's own cultures and histories, and that has to be part of the educational system.
Thank you for that. Zakiya, what do we need to do to build a stronger education movement?
I'll answer this politically correct. No. Build a stronger education movement. I think that we definitely need to continue to resource and support the people who are directly impacted. I mean, that's the simplest way I can put it. The people who are most connected to the issues around educational justice, who I guess again are most impacted by the injustices in education today, are also the people who have the answers. And so I think that there should be a movement, a continued movement, to resource them and to also help them to continue to connect and build relationships with folks in the Ivory Tower like Renelia Randall and Mark Warren. I think that we continue to build around those kinds of networks and support systems. I think that we can have a successful shift, if you will, in how we do education in the United States.
Mark, same question. What do we need to do to build a stronger education movement?
Yes, well, I think that this book, Lift Us Up, Don't Push Us Out, Voices from the Front Lines of the Educational Justice Movement, was really designed to be a tool for movement building, to help build that stronger movement. Because even though people are coming together across their localities, most people don't really know these stories. They don't know what's been going on in Dayton and the amazing successes that they've had there. And we need to build a stronger movement, we need to lift up these stories, to show people and to inspire people to organize where they are, because they see that there is hope. They see that change can happen when grassroots folks, when parents of color, youth of color, and their allies, amongst teachers and others, really get together to demand change, and then also to against these systems, but also then to engage and work and try to transform the education that they receive. So I think that's an important part of what we need to do to build a stronger movement, and we're trying to accomplish in the book. And speaking as a white person, one of the things that I think that I firmly believe is that this struggle for racial justice and educational justice is a responsibility for all of us, whoever we are in this country. And we all have to ask the question of what is really going to be the future of our young people? What kind of society do we want to be creating and living in for ourselves? And we end the book, I think, with this challenge, which is is our future generation, particularly our youth of color, are they going to just be cogs in a capitalist industrial machine where they're working in low-wage poverty jobs for the rest of their lives? Are they going to be fodder for a prison and mass incarceration system? Or are we really going to create an educational system that lifts up our young people so that they can be change agents in their lives and social justice warriors for their communities?
That's a great answer, and I thank you both for your time. To your answer, Mark, I want to leave with this note. Will the young people simply be fodder for a industrial capitalist system? And so we know that America is not the America of 100 years ago. It's not the industrial nation of 100 years ago. Through a global economy, America is not winning. Because of the education system, many communities, black, brown, and other, are suffering. We don't manufacture like we used to. We do not turn out mathematicians like we used to. We don't turn out scientists like we used to. We don't turn out engineers like we used to. We don't turn out computer scientists. There's been many concerns about Russia and other people hacking our systems. And at the highest level of government, the NSA and others have a very difficult time finding the competent scientists to be able to combat what they call security issues. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so we looked at this movie recently, Hidden Figures.
Right.
And we saw the significance of the black woman to be able to help America compete with Russia. Russia had already landed on the moon. And America was trying to keep up.
Right.
And we find in this story that has been hidden, it's been over a significant period of time that this story was hidden, that a black woman, a mathematician, made the formula that sent America to the moon. And so it is an example. If we don't provide the proper education to all of those that are due a proper education, equality across the board, then this great nation will no longer be a great nation. So we thank you here at the Dignity in Schools campaign. We're at the offices of Kofi for the National Week of Action. We are supporting Counselors Not Cops, and we look forward to you tuning into our website, Dignity in Schools campaign. I'm H.A. Jabbar, Interim Executive Director. We thank Mark Warren for his book, Lift Us Up, Don't Push Us Out. We thank Zakiya Sankara-Jabar for her work as co-founder of Racial Justice Now and also as a national field organizer for the Dignity in Schools campaign. I'm H.A. Jabbar, wishing you peace.